Hi, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the Bitch in My Brain podcast. My name is Josie, and I am beyond excited to be launching this podcast. It has been in my mind, in my body, in my soul for the last 2 years. So to finally have it come to fruition is beyond exciting. And before we jump in, I really want to take a moment to acknowledge you. I want to acknowledge you for taking the time, the space, and the energy to do something for yourself and to give yourself permission to learn more about your inner world and learn more about the ways that you can make incredible change in your life. So I wanted to say thank you, thank you, thank you. I created this podcast as a way to reach women. I've found in my own experiences, my conversations I've had with other women, we have a lot in common, especially when it comes to our struggles, whether that be body image issues, self-confidence, self-worth is a huge one. And I wanted to create a resource, essentially, where women can come and they can feel seen, they can feel heard, they can feel validated that what they're experiencing or what they're struggling with is true and is something that we can all relate to. And I've also found that when we are in community with each other, when we are sharing our experiences, the wisdom, the lessons learned, we can create great change, not only within ourselves, but also the world. And I think we can all agree that some fucking peace would be nice. And just a heads up, I am a cursor. It is my most authentic self, and that's exactly what I want to bring to you. So be prepared for, a little bit of pizzazz to the podcast, especially if you're listening. I want to show up as my most authentic self, and that comes with me sharing my own stories, my own experiences, and to be honest, you're going to learn some of my traumas as well. And I'm so happy to be able to do something like this where us as women can get together and share these very personal, very intimate things about ourselves in hopes of helping others. So that is why I created this podcast, and I am so, once again, excited for you to be alongside me as I venture into this journey. This is new for me, so we are in it together. Before we really jump in, I feel like I owe you guys a little introduction, a little backstory to where I was to where I am now. And it really started when I was 24. When I was 24, I started my own freelance marketing business. And within the first year, it took off. And I had multiple clients. I had grown it to be a 6-figure business. And I was really proud of it. But I think it was more so my ego that was proud of it. I put so much of my self-worth and value in my business. So ultimately, when I was making money, I was happier. When I had additional clients or clients coming to me that I would turn down, that gave me like a sense of, like a pat on the back. And I thought I was like the cat's pajamas. Like I thought I was so fucking cool. And I mean, I had it like on my forehead, like, oh my God, I'm so cool. Everyone look at me. And as I continued to grow my business, and I had clients ranging from various industries. So I worked with a tech company. I worked in the healthcare industry. I worked with a med spa at one point. I worked at with a meal kit delivery service for a little bit as well. And I realized that like I wasn't really getting this it wasn't paying off in the sense of I still wasn't necessarily happy, wasn't necessarily living my most authentic life. And I truly believe that the universe has your back. And when I was 26, so it was the summer of 2022, I had my dear friend Kylie, I know she's listening, I love you. She reached out to me about a potential client who was a life coach as well as had her own life coach academy. So that is a place where people can go to become trained and certified as a life coach. And as I started working with her, I was writing some of her content, and I knew about the industry in the sense of I knew the keywords, I knew some of the big dogs that were very popular in the industry, but I didn't really know any of the concepts on a deeper level. And in the fall, when she was starting her next cohort of students, she offered for me to go through the first 2 modules of the program in an effort to learn more about her content, her coaching skills, all of that. And I had this full body reaction to say yes. And I think it took like 0.2 seconds for me to be like, I want to do the whole thing. I don't want to just do the first 2 modules. I want to be a part of this whole process. And I knew that this was what I needed to do because a few months prior, I had essentially hit my rock bottom. I wouldn't necessarily say I was addicted to drugs and alcohol, but it was definitely a sabotaging pattern that was leading me down a scary and not loving place. And so I knew that this was the push that I was looking for to really go inward and take a look. So when we first started the program, I went in knowing that I had to address my negative self-talk, aka the bitch in my brain. It was the most important thing that I could start with because I was evil to myself. I knew exactly what buttons to push. I knew exactly what to say and what to say about what. And it was so destructive. And I didn't really think that there was any escape from it. And I knew that if I didn't address this bitch in my brain, it was going to keep me from making the progress that I desired. And that is why in this episode, we are starting right where I started, discussing the bitch in your brain. So we have thousands of thoughts per day, and it's said that about 80% of those thoughts are negative, which makes sense because it's been scientifically proven that we have a negativity bias in our brain, meaning we're more likely to focus on the negative than we are on the positive. And I find relief in this statistic because it basically is saying that the moment we left the womb, we had negativity hardwired in our brain. And I think this really lessens the amount of guilt or shame we feel around having negative self-talk. And before I continue, I really want to make it clear that our negative self-talk is not our enemy. If anything, it's our friend. Our negative self-talk was created in order to protect us. And the focus of the protection lies in the desire to avoid rejection, failure, disappointment. And so although the purpose and point of our negative self-talk is to protect us from those sort of feelings, it's not necessarily in service. The way it operates is not necessarily in service of our best selves. So the way I like to think about my bitch is her intentions are good, but her execution is absolute shit. And our negative self-talk really begins to form below the age of 10. And that's because it's right around the time that we are beginning to craft our identity. And as we craft our identity, the way we do it is from a very observational sort of point of view. So we are consistently watching what our parents are doing, what our teachers are doing, what our friends are doing, what society is doing, especially if you were, an MTV kid. I think we picked up a lot of observations via the shows that they would air. And so we're creating an identity around what we're viewing as right and what we're viewing as wrong. And a good example of this would be our parents are talking to another adult and they say something and you see the adult's reaction was either a smile or, they took a step back or shock. And as we view that situation, or if we're listening in as well, we're watching what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And by kind of making those distinctions on what is acceptable and what's not acceptable, we kind of create these guardrails on how to be a good human. The problem is when we avoid going outside of those guardrails, we end up welcoming in that negative self-talk. And I have a very, very, very vivid memory that still even affects me in some ways today. And it happened in 3rd grade. We had a substitute teacher and they were quizzing us on where to put commas in a sentence. It was like whether it's before or after the word but. And so this girl raises her hand, stands up, and answers the question. However, she got it wrong. And I remember looking at her and seeing her facial expression of embarrassment. And I also remember looking at the rest of my classmates and their facial expressions of judgment. And in that moment, I remember thinking to myself, unless I know the answer fully to a question, I will not answer it because it is way too risky to say something that isn't, true. And on that day, I made kind of a vow that, okay, we are avoiding answering any questions. And recently, I kind of felt that creep back up. I was sitting in a meeting with one of my clients, and we also had an additional marketing agency that was joining us. And we were brainstorming some ideas for a new campaign. And we were tossing out ideas, and I went and tossed out my idea. And I was met with silence, kind of no movement. Everyone was really stiff. And it immediately triggered that memory of 3rd grade. And so once I felt as though, I got the idea wrong or it was not in alignment with the campaign, I was like, okay, I am not, tossing out any more ideas. It's way too risky. And so for the rest of the meeting, I was, stayed silent. And I knew on an internal level that I had some pretty good fucking ideas, but the risk of sharing them did, outweighed the success of the campaign. And that's really where we start to see negative self-talk sabotage our success. So negative self-talk really creates this fixed mindset that becomes really restrictive. And we end up avoiding taking on new opportunities. We avoid conquering our challenges. which means we're ultimately impacting our growth. And over time, when we really let this negative self-talk dictate our lives, our decisions, our choices, we end up staying stagnant, and it keeps us basically stuck and unable to move. Negative self-talk also allows us to control our environment or our outcomes. And I see this a lot when it comes to appearance. And basically the premise of it controlling our environment is we talk all this shit to ourselves, because if we do it, then when someone else does it, it feels less threatening. So if we criticize ourselves and pick apart each aspect of ourselves, if someone else chooses to pick those same things that we're saying about ourselves, the criticism feels a little less impactful. Still causes pain, no doubt, but we almost prep ourselves for that pain. And really, this one's huge to me when it comes to appearance, because as a kid, and I know a lot of other women feel this exact same way, but appearance was definitely on like a pedestal of what you needed to be accepted into society. And so right around like the age of 9, it could have been even earlier, but I remember sitting on the end of my mom's bed as she looked at herself in the mirror. And I remember watching her pick her body apart and say, you know, this could be an inch bigger, this could be an inch smaller, I hate this, I hate that. And I quickly learned, okay, we need to like make sure our body's perfect in order to be liked or accepted. And so then I began looking into the mirror and picking myself apart about my appearance. And really it started to accelerate when I was in middle school and then into high school. And I was one of the girlies that hit puberty pretty late. Not pretty late, but later than the rest of my friends, which now I'm like, oh my God, that like lucky me. Like I would take that over starting my period earlier, but you know, whatever. And I was really self-conscious about the size of my boobs. A lot of my friends, my best friend at the time had really nice boobs, and which is crazy to say about like a 12-year-old. But at the time, you know, that was all the rage. And to not have them was kind of painful, especially because at that age, with all the, you know, let's say boys, you know, boobs were huge to them. Probably because, yeah, they were going through their own development phase. So at that time, like I said, boobs were a really big deal. And I was really self-conscious about the fact that they were so small, I couldn't go buy, you know, a bombshell bra from Victoria's Secret because everyone knew I didn't have any boobs. And I knew that all of a sudden, if I did hit puberty, they weren't going to grow overnight. And so it was really this internal kind of battle. And I remember making these jokes of like, I'm going to get a boob job when I turn 18. And a lot of people thought they were jokes. However, I was like dead set on getting a boob job the moment I turned 18. All my friends, they were like, can't wait to get tattoos. I'm like, I can't wait to get a new pair of tatas. And that really started to kind of snowball more and more. And so the fact that I was already able to criticize myself saying, you know, I don't have boobs, so that means I'm ugly. It doesn't, you know, boys aren't going to be interested in me because I don't have this. There's nothing I can do. So I prepped myself for all of these, jokes that would be made or comments be made to me. And so when they did get back to me, and I want to make a little PSA about this, if anyone has any brothers or sons, or even daughters, they can be, attached to this as well. But the words that we say when we are young stick with us into adulthood. And the comments that were made by some of these guys in middle school and high school, they still stick with me. And there are still times that I am triggered or pulled back into my 7th grade, insecure self picking apart something. So I just want to make it, just really clear in the sense of our words are powerful, and to use them wisely, especially at a young age when those comments rock our world and, like I said, really have an impact. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox. So like I said, when they did say those things and I found out about them, the conversation immediately started in my brain. And it stayed like that for a long, long time until I started really working on my negative self-talk. And I realized that when I begin my negative self-talk, I can open up the conversation and have a conversation with the bitch in my brain that's really asking, where are we going with this? What is this in service of? And it really is about bringing awareness to the situation. And that really is the first step, is to catch yourself in the moment, in the act of negative self-talk, and really acknowledge, how is this making me feel? How is this making me see myself? How is this, these things that I'm saying to myself helping me in any way? And once you're able to kind of build in that pause and ask that question to the bitch in your brain, and it sounds so goofy that I'm talking about it as two separate people, but I truly do believe that there are, two sides to the conversations that we're having in our head. And so I welcome in this really collaborative sort of environment. That way I can acknowledge that the bitch in my brain is coming from a good place, coming from a protective place, and what she is using, as justification is real, did feel real for me. I have those feelings that still, stick with me. It's almost like she's like, I've got this evidence. And so by being able to say to her, I know you have this evidence. I know this has triggered us in the past. However, how can we look at this differently? And how can we really see what this is doing for us? Where's the payoff of this sort of language? So for example, I went through this phase, this I hate my feet phase. And I would consistently look at them and say, they're too skinny, or they're not skinny enough, or my toes are too long, or my toes are too short. And when I started to really look at what conversation was coming up, as well as what conversation was needed to bring me out of this negative self-talk, it really stems back, and this is actually funny. It stems back to elementary school, and I remember being in the cafeteria and my friend Connor was sitting next to me. And he had these sandals on. And so I looked down at his feet as I'm eating, as we're sitting on at the table eating lunch, and I remember thinking to myself, like, oh, I don't like his feet. And they were looking like a little rough, like, and this is not to call them out, but they were like kind of dry and and unkept. And at the time, I thought my mom's feet were absolutely beautiful. I still do to this day. And I made a vow to myself, once again, that feet matter, that my appearance really matters. And I would then, when I'd look in the mirror or I'd be in a pair of sandals and I'd look down, I'd, cringe or start talking shit about them. And then one day I was sitting in the bath and I was looking down at my feet at the end of the tub. And I started, on that cycle of like, ugh, why do they have to look like that? Da 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 da. And then I caught myself and I built in the pause and I welcomed in the conversation and I said, once again, what is this in service of? What is this doing? And essentially, how can I reframe? And I was then able to look at my feet and say, what do my feet do for me? What do they allow me to do in my life that lets me be the best version of myself by living my best life? And I was able to look at them and say, oh my gosh, my feet allow me to do yoga every morning. They allow me to walk Miso, my dog, every morning. They have allowed me to explore Japan, Korea, South Africa, Taiwan, all of these things that make me happy and light me up. And to look at my feet and realize all of the benefits, it really moves you into a place of gratefulness. And by bringing our awareness and being grateful for what our body can do, what our mind can do, we're really transitioning into this act of self-love. And I can tell you one thing, as women, we deserve so much self-love. We truly do. And so I want to give you kind of a few tips that I started with when I began the program and started addressing my negative self-talk. And it starts kind of very simple, where throughout the day, whenever I would have a negative thought, I would write it down. And you can do this in like Notes app or like your journal or whatever. And then I would look at the list and I would look at each entry and I would say, is this something you would say to a friend? I would kind of do both. And is this something that you would say to your younger self? And that really helped me put it into perspective of the things that I'm saying are harmful, they are destructive, and although I may be saying it to myself, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's okay. And so once I, shifted into that mindset, it really did kind of change my outlook on negative self-talk. So once I, wrote down and kind of had that small little conversation about myself, I would then make a column for a reframe. And so if I was talking shit about my skin, like I had a bump on my skin, and as I reread it, I'm able to reframe as, my skin is a protective barrier and it is doing its job. And although this is the side effect of it doing its job, it is keeping me healthy. And so as I began to reframe, I saw that there is a lot of positivity that can come out of our negative self-talk. And when we're able to bring awareness to it, it becomes an incredibly loving relationship. It takes work. I mean, it is definite. You have to almost go through like couples therapy, but at the end of it, it becomes easier and easier, and that is something that moves us closer and closer to our best self. So to round up the episode, I hope that you take the time this week to implement maybe a few of the tips and tricks to help bring awareness to your negative self-talk and ultimately open up a loving conversation. I cannot wait to continue talking about negative self-talk, the bitch in your brain, as well as additional concepts and topics that have been very impactful for me along my journey. So to be able to share these things with you, it gets me all jazzed up. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will see you next time. Take care. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this episode spoke to you, and I can't wait to continue to share so much more. If you're feeling called, please subscribe and leave a review so together we can reach even more women who deserve to live their best life. And you can follow me on social at The Bitch in My Brain as I share my journey and life in real time. I can't wait to see you bitches next week. Take care.